Hello and welcome, guys. We are back, Cyber Diaries, episode number 24. We have another amazing guest on our cards, Ryan Sheldrake. So, welcome, first of all, Ryan, to Cyber Diaries.
Thanks for having me, Marius.
Yeah, it's great to have you on board. I guess those of you obviously who never met Ryan yourself would be great to if you just can cover a bit about your career, how you ended up and what you worked in on. I'm sure you got some exciting projects that you worked on before, so you can just briefly share with our
Yeah,
audience what you have worked on.
totally. Let's condense 25 years into 30 seconds if we can.
Yeah,
Foundation in banking and finance, payments, moving all the money that pay our wages was a sort of middle career thing of mine. 40 trillion pounds a year used to go through the systems I managed. So security was kind of a thing there. Moved over into the product side. One of my suppliers invited me over to that side of things. Then kind of went on software composition analysis before it was called that,
yeah,
software bill of materials before they were even called that, kind of 10 years ago, at the very beginning of the Kubernetes kind of movement, and then into threat detection with Lacework, where I was field CTO. Just done a short stint at Harness, whose DevSecOps delivery platform. And those with good notice will notice that we've got a 404 up here with a TBC coming out very soon. So great to be with you.
sounds exciting. Things are happening along the way, and I'm sure, obviously, as you say, 25 years, you've done some great and wonderful things. And I'm always fascinated, to learn from people that, especially, in a senior positions, how you challenge. So, I guess if we can delve into a few of these things. So, for example, as a former CTO at Lacework,
Yeah.
how do you see the, most significant cloud security challenges are, that we are getting faced to? How do you see this sort of field evolving as such?
Yeah. I cast my mind back a little bit, sort of, there's a brief history of time to be, because, we're always learning.
Yeah,
Everything's changing, everything's evolving. Anybody that's seen me, it's hashtag always learning, because I always am.
yeah,
That's who I am. It's in here. Um, so how it's evolving is that, first of all, I think we used to build castles. Yeah, the perimeter was very well defined, and all the analogies of, hey, it's my data center, you can't get into it, and you will never see what I'm doing. That's gone. Yeah, let's be absolutely honest. The perimeter, there are perimeters, and when people say there are no perimeters, I kind of disagree with that. Whether identity is a perimeter, or kind of authorization, or whatever, there are different perimeters, but there's not one. There's definitely not one anymore. So we've got to take different approaches because of where we define our points of control, feedback, and learning. I think learning is also a perimeter thing, because if you're getting DDoSed all the time, you probably need to enhance your capabilities in being resistant to that. So I think we need to tackle this on multiple fronts. But alongside, active threat detection and stuff, the amount of legislation that's come in over the last 10 years and is coming towards us is huge. And I know that, regulation, we could probably discuss that for the rest of the podcast. Let's be honest, the
yeah.
opinions of what that actually means. Doesn't mean to say you're secure, but it means that you're more secure than not adhering to certain standards. And again, just like the perimeter, I don't think there's a single, golden standard that covers all angles,
Yeah.
but I think adhering to them gives you at least a few steps up the maturity ladder, if that makes sense.
No, definitely. And actually, what I wanted to piggyback on that conversation is, lately I've been talking, and if we look at the market or the industry itself, I think there are things broken and we're not addressing. Because if we look at statistics, we are spending every year more on cybersecurity, but the breaches are having the same trajectory as they had before. That means that we are not moving the needle in the right direction. Now, what's
Yeah,
the reason for that? I think, and I think, and that's where I guess we can talk about cloud and various other, I guess, aspects of it. But I
yeah,
think the problem is that sometimes certain leaders are spending more money to do more firefighting, and we're not, because essentially what we're doing, and I always talk about this, is being reactive security. So we're just looking at the tools, tool gives us an output of saying this cloud asset is misconfigured, go and
Yeah.
fix it. Then it finds another one,
Yeah.
but nobody's thinking of like, but why are these assets misconfigured in the first place? Where is the business process broken
Yeah.
during the build of those assets that creates that issue in the first place? And I think that's whether it's, and that's the thing. I don't think it's always about just tools. It's about creating processes and about creating the mindset of how we
I
get
don't think
to
it's
the root
purely
cause.
about security. I think it's a much, much broader evolution thing. And I think that we see symptoms because our part of the industry moves so rapidly. Yes, infrastructure's changed in the last 10, 15 plus years, but in the last 15 months, all this Gen AI stuff and everything else has come along with whole new attack surfaces that we probably were not even looking at 2 years ago. So I think because we move so quick, sometimes we are subject to detecting the symptoms. And by the time we get funding to look at the cause, things have moved on a bit. But to build on your kind of point is, I think it's using a non-security kind of analogy. It's a bit like doing the cloud migration, but just rebuilding what you did in the data center in the cloud, and then wondering why it cost you a load of money, is no better than what you were doing. You're still releasing at a low cadence, and your competitors more efficient and going to market more effectively.
Yeah.
That's just nothing to do with security. What it does, though, is if you're not leveraging cloud native tools, you're potentially forgetting a different risk surface, a different perimeter, as I mentioned in the initial question, that, well, you no longer own those walls. Yeah, you no longer can go to the switch and unplug the cable because Google and Amazon frown if you knock on their data center door. It's like you're probably not going to get anywhere near it. So you've just got to take a very different approach and possibly put different controls, different checks, different monitoring in place to ensure that those new attack surfaces are at least visible and therefore manageable within whatever architecture you move forward with.
Yeah, and I think I've got a few bugbears, I guess, with this kind of industry and the way we sometimes talk about things. Even as you say, for example, a similar simple thing as you say, visibility or coverage. It's an important aspect that sometimes is overlooked. But you can't protect something if you can't see it. And we talk about industry, whether it's basics or sort of ground level of security hygiene.
Yeah.
But when you're talking it about at scale, 20, 30, 40,000 employees, even the basics are not easy to do. And I think that's why the problems occur, because you miss one asset, it could be the downfall of your organization because the asset is not monitored. It might have potential access into something that's highly sensitive, and that's your downfall. You have one account that doesn't have an MFA. Again, if it's an admin account, it can have a downfall effect of it. So
Yeah.
do you think, is there a silver lining of how we're addressing cyber hygiene, or is it education problem, or is there, again, I'm not necessarily think it's a tooling problem.
No, I think you need to get to a point that, so say that this is dependent on the organization, but let's go fairly generic. Say that the utopia rather is engineers or developers, whatever they identify as, people who do coding work,
Yeah.
are self-serving. They click a button, they can get an environment, it pops up, it's in a VPC that's appropriate, and but make it easy. Those three words, right, can go a huge distance in getting to the basics. Because if it's easy and your development community aren't bringing their own laptops in, aren't going out on a credit card into a cloud that's not authorized, and not using patented self-service, I don't know, VMs, pipelines, clusters, depends on the organization again, but you can make it, hey, I need a new AKS cluster or EKS cluster, depending on the clouds. Bang, that's what it does. But it comes with basic controls like you can't use root, you can't use privileged. And what if it's easy and they're not doing loads of paperwork and waiting in queues, etc., they're much more likely to go, hey, that's okay. I can use that and I can get going. And as an engineer, I want to get going. That's me. I want to
Yeah.
code. I want to develop features. I don't want to go and spend 6 months waiting for a new namespace in a cluster. That's just madness. So
Yeah.
make it easy. That is my number one tip.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. I think I have the similar analogy where, I talk to people and I say, you want to get to the place where it's sort of you define the best path. So, when I talk about cloud engineering, for example, from security perspective, is I have a problem because if you're building virtual machine and then say you created widely open firewall, I need to create a ticket for you to fix it. But now if you're building another virtual machine and you do the same, there's another ticket, another fix.
Yeah.
If I define those standards in the policies that says we are not allowing virtual machines to be built with any rule firewalls, and your
Yeah.
build will break.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
but the thing is, as you say, it making it easy, but also I think that another problem is you need to get to a level of engineering and people who are passionate about engineering where how you showcase the error as well, so people understand,
Yeah.
not just
Feedback.
saying and that's it. Build actual information about errors, and people can self-serve and understand and solve those errors.
Yeah. And I think getting feedback, because I don't know about you, I've made some mistakes, right? I've been around a while. I've got things wrong. I've, maybe over put controls in development, which are overly kind of, production like, just
Yeah,
because, hey, it's easy just to port rule set one to this environment. And then you lose the context because, if it's a development environment, it's away from production data, etc., then you need to be able to have those patterns to be contextual. So the right rules are in the right place. And then if you're porting things, make sure that they're not, changed whilst it moves up the environments or, gets deployed into half a cluster or whatever else. But I do think that patterning, you need to take the feedback because if it's not working for engineers, it's no longer easy. Back to my original point.
yeah, and I think it's not only about engineering. I think sometimes as well, I have a bugbear sometimes with GRC professionals, because GRC professionals are normally tasked with building processes, policies, whatever it may be.
Yes.
Now, if you have someone person who goes in a corner and builds a policy for an engineer, but they don't know how engineer works, how applicable that policy is going to be. And that's
Yeah.
where, it's you need to be working in a collaborative space and understand usability versus restriction.
Totally. It's if again taking it away from security back to a product, you would hopefully in 2024 never be building a product for 2 years without getting some feedback along the way from friends, family, the market that you're addressing. You wouldn't go and just go, right, I'll see you in 24 months. I'm going to go and create this amazing product that I think you're going to love. And then, da-da,
Yeah.
it's nothing like they were expecting. It's exactly the same with a policy that's created in the dark. You need to be able to go, you can suggest it, get feedback. You can implement it, get feedback. Everything's about that feedback. And then if they say, and they could be anybody, I'm just
Yeah.
using a team says, hey, Ryan, this is not working for me. Okay, I've got a pressure to go, I don't know, NIST 8350 or whatever it is,
Yeah.
ISO, whatever. It's like, I've got pressure from here. You need to do this. Right. What we need to do is get those perimeters in place so I can lessen the controls in context of that perimeter, your environment that's not production or whatever.
Yeah.
And then we can then say, as we move towards production or live data or sensitive data, depending on the route to live, then I need to be able to demonstrate that I'm adhering to this regulation, this policy, this standard, because we need that to trade in the USA, for example.
Yeah.
So it's about conversation.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think, I always like to share, a simple example. I think, the organizations who are always saying, oh, we're encouraging collaboration, but it's depend how you incentivize it. Because if you, for example, in sales as well, I've been talking to organizations, they say, oh, we want to incentivize collaboration in sales. But if you reward the top salesman, what do you think that as a culture will give you? What's my incentive to collaborate with another guy if only one person's going to win whatever, the
Yeah.
bonus, let's say? you have to think about how you're going to create a culture to foster that collaboration, and that's, that's always something that you need to think about. Now, if we want to say, I wanted to pick up another kind of segue, which I think is becoming a theme lately in cybersecurity, is the word resilience. Do you think that we are reaching sort of an idea, or I guess an epiphany, that it's almost impossible to prevent all cyber attacks? So how do we maintain business operations while bad things might happen,
Yeah.
and move sort of towards, as we talk about, resilience? Do you think that's the trajectory the market is going?
I think that we are already struggling to keep up. I've already said, it's like we always get the symptom because we don't have, the millions of people or the millions of dollars or pounds that we need to be ahead of the game. Because an attacker needs one success, and we've got to protect against every attack that they could think of. Maybe they get one right. So I think it's absolutely a thing. One thing that does give me a bit of encouragement is that so far, legislation and regulation have lagged massively for years and years. Even, the PCI DSS is only just becoming cloud friendly in version 4.0, which is, recent times. And how long's Amazon been around? 15 years, give or take. It's a while anyway. But there's a new Resiliency Act coming out, which is Digital Operational Resilience Act. It was put together in 2023, I think. It's a pretty heavy going 300-page document. And it's the other DORA. There are two DORAs in IT as well. Everybody loves a 4-letter acronym, right? So this is actually a Resilience Act. So, and you've got to prove resiliency. So that's not saying you've got to stop all threats. It's proving that if a threat or an outage manifests itself, can your business remain available and functional, especially if it's critical national infrastructure? Or, and this is the bit I really like, and this I don't think I'm happy to be corrected. I'm sure somebody will put some comments somewhere if I'm incorrect anyway, is that it actually takes not just the critical organization, it actually takes the upstream organizations into account. So think like their supply chain. So banks have a huge amount of supply chain. They have software suppliers, they have hardware suppliers, they have all sorts of other things, and they then have to demonstrate resiliency too. Because what's the point in you going, I'm resilient, but my diesel generator only lasts for 3 days, and if the power grid's not supplying me, then what's that 3 days actually mean in real business terms? As in, will the lights go out? Can we do banking? Can we do payments? Can we do telecoms anymore? So I really like the fact that at last there's something that goes just beyond an organization centric to more of a supply chain of organization approach. It remains to be legislated. I think it comes in January, just after Christmas, rings a bell.
25, I think, January.
So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that pans out as that comes along. But I think it's a positive move.
Yeah, I definitely think so, because I think, it's always, as you probably well know, there are organizations that are hesitant to do security, and they do security because of regulations. And I think that's sometimes the way forward. And, at least there is something that will shake up the organizations. The one thing which you just touched, and I think it's an important point as well to think about, and I don't think that Dora touches that, but I think it's another thing that we, as a whole industry, should be thinking about, is when you're talking about supply chain, we're addressing supply chain from individual organizations' point of view. But when we're talking about things that happen to like CrowdStrike and things like that, I think we also need to think about systemic supply chain issues, like what happened to a blood supply. Because if you go a resilience plan, say on this particular hospital, but if you're using one specific company in your third-party supply chain across, say, thousands of hospitals, so it not only affects one hospital, but it affects systemic sort of, change. And how do we look at systemically, kind of, whether it's diversifying or whether it's creating some sort of, again, regulation? I don't know what's the view, but I think we need to look at that point as well.
Definitely. That one to many could be catastrophic, but until now, we've always been very, I'm okay. You're okay, right? I kind of trust you're doing the right thing, but this actually links those together. So it's a bit like, going back to software composition analysis, right back to, 10 years ago. It's like, right, I'm writing an application and I'm going to go to NPM. Yeah, perfectly valid place to go for software. I'm sure everybody's doing everything they can, but yeah, I now got 10,000 dependencies. Of those, entropy's set in, some dead projects have been brought in by default. And with the best will in the world, not everybody's doing everything all the time proactively.
Yeah.
And again, you've got to piece that together to make sure you're getting, what is my actual risk by consuming somebody else's product, power, data, whatever that might be. And I do think supply chains are definitely going to become more prevalent. It's not just going to be a single approach with this one.
Yeah. I wanted to actually touch a point on another thing, which, I've read many books lately, but one book that really made a big impression in terms of security engineering was Kelly Shortridge's book about chaos engineering.
Okay.
And I think it's an amazing field going towards resiliency. Start practicing chaos engineering, but
yeah.
I very rarely see organizations actually practicing that. Do you think it's a maturity problem, or it's a scared? I guess people are scared to start practicing with their production environment because they haven't got it quite right yet. Where do you think what's holding organizations to moving that direction?
There's a couple of things. If they've done what I call the wheelbarrow cloud migration, put the inner wheelbarrow, tip it in the cloud, we're good. You're nowhere near ready for chaos. Nowhere near. You're still, looking for that database restore that you did 2 weeks ago, and all that kind of stuff that we used to do back in the bad old days, as I like to call them. It is definitely maturity. I am seeing people going to pre-production though, and organizations that I can't name, but surprise me that they've got a chaos hub actually running. And this is in financial organizations, that kind of a thing, but they're doing it in pre-prod and then replicating the environment into production, because they started, in a little renegade team, whatever you want to call it over here. Hey, I've got some cool stuff and whatever. Then it's kind of come up through, the system integration test, and pre-prod is kind of where I'm seeing the more mature organizations. Not everybody can be Netflix, right? Let's just be honest with each other. It's like, there's a lot of regulation about when you can change stuff and things in banking and payments. And if your movie stops, it's probably not as bad as your mortgage not getting paid. Maybe debatable for some people, but in the broader terms. And I do think it will come along. And I think it is fantastic from a resilience perspective. But I think there's also a slight misunderstanding of what chaos engineering can mean. I think a lot of people think of, it's going to simulate a single network port being unplugged, the old switch thing that I was mentioning in the data center, going pull a patch cable out, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm okay. But what about if you simulated an entire region outage or an entire cloud outage?
Yeah, I think, as you say, it's a great segue into, because what you touched, I think, an important analogy taken out of, say, for example, product development, because prototyping and closing feedback loops, it's a very important thing, because, like, as you say, those scenarios that you will build in chaos engineering, normally you hypothesize, but unless you put them into practice, you never know what's going to happen, because as whenever you write, you can write, oh, this idea is going to be amazing, and then it goes out and nothing. Absolute silence.
You assume the database will be there, right? You assume the database that you never really think that you use that much is there, and then all of a sudden it's not there. And that's the thing that gets you, and that's why it's brilliant, because it tests your architecture. And again, back to the non-wheelbarrow approach, it's like, it's great doing this on the application layer. What about the data layer? Because without the data, you're going to struggle, right? So it really is, it's a feedback loop, like everything. Is like, is my architecture right? Okay, I think it's right. Let's start testing it in a clone of production. And I say that very specifically, not dev, not whatever, if you can, clone production away and maybe use synthetic data because of sensitivity, but
Yep.
use it as close to production as you can and do as much of chaos as you can. Not just your patch thing, but full simulated operational outages. And that will wheel out where your single points of failure are, or even your dual points of failure. Because like, hey, I've got my database in Google, right? Well, what happens if that disappears?
Yeah.
So you've got to start with a single fault, and then you get bigger and bigger experiments until you truly can say, hey, if I don't know, something bad happens to the region in whichever cloud provider, I will be okay. That takes time. That takes money, time, effort, everything.
Yeah, but I think it's just, I guess, is the road of maturity, of understanding of, obviously, as you say, not every organization can do that, but those who, based on your risk appetite and your risk outcomes,
Yeah.
you need to have some sort of level of planning.
But I think if you're a startup, this should be like, maybe not day one because you're probably prototyping on your Mac, but day 3 or 4 or 5 of actual customer, at post go live, you should be doing it as early as you can and looking at leveraging resilient technology to make sure hopefully your startup's going to go boom and you're going to be the next Deca unicorn or whatever they're now called. You don't want to be re-architecting whilst the plane's flying. Nobody wants to be changing the wings on the plane when it's in the air.
Yeah. I wanted to segue a bit, and I always like to piggyback, I guess, on people careers perspective and things like that.
Sure.
Your, I guess, experience spans both, not only technical but also sales engineering roles. And
Yes.
do you think that dual aspect sort of help you shape a approach to cybersecurity solutions and implementations?
I think it gives me a slightly unique insight because the startup advisory role that I do in a voluntary basis, I actually really like it. It keeps me plugged into what's coming up, what people are thinking. And right at the beginning of the generative AI stuff, I did some interviewing on behalf of some startups that they were looking for a CTO, which is cool, right?
Okay.
It's like, I know the tech, you've got a cool idea. I can probably plug the right people together. And that's great. And again, back to maybe you just want to think about using this architecture to both of those folks that are speaking and going like, right, go now, you can go and do it, you're good, kind of thing gives me a great thing. From a sales engineering perspective, sometimes you're into a much more mature organization, brownfield and things like that. And you've got to go in more of a consultant and say, look, we've got this and we've inherited it and it's been around for 20 years. How can we realistically go in and start to unpick this and move us into a better state of resiliency, security, less risk, and hopefully at the same time, higher delivery. And I mean that as in far as releases and evolution of the business goes. So I think it gives me a slightly unique view of doing both of those. But when my first full-time job was an operator, right? In the middle of the night, watching things break. So resiliency was really important because guess what? I did not want a busy night shift. So it's been there for 20 odd years of, wow, I've been called out many, many hundreds, if not thousands of times. I wish they would have designed it better. So it's kind of there for me. We should always have, that resiliency. And if we can't be, truly on resilient, we want to be able to get back to a known good state as rapidly as possible.
Yeah. What would you say? I mean, I know we had plenty of conversations about AppSec and DevSecOps in many previous, meetings.
Yeah.
From your experience, what would you say is a couple of key critical components that determines whether your AppSec program succeeds or fails, or where, I guess, on a flip side, where organizations are mostly failing in their AppSec programs?
Okay, I'll answer the negative first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Where it fails is when security folks think they know everything and need to control everything. That is number one, will fail. In fact, he probably won't even get off the ground. It will be like, right, okay. And you will get engineering teams doing stuff down here and around the side and on a credit card and everything I mentioned before. So we don't know everything and we can't control everything. I think we should just admit that. And what we can do is we can make sure that with actionable information and appropriate reward and objectives are in place that, hey, yeah, we need to build some controls in. If we can template that, great, they can go and get an environment. If they're building an application, it's going to need some testing, right? Can you self-serve? Do you need training? Do you have a security champion, or do we help you to build that? I've seen centers of excellence go. They're a matter of great discussion as well. Come and go. But if you can push the onus, the accountability back into engineering for things that are known. Yeah, I'm talking about things like known vulnerabilities. I'm talking about misconfiguration of infrastructure. You can either put those guardrails in place, or you can say, right, do whatever you want in your environment, be that on your Mac or a dev environment. But as soon as it goes to here, these controls will be in place. So you may as well put them in place early and know that you can get into pre-prod or whatever it is going live. But then think about the advantages of doing that. If you can get the culture right, that's the biggest challenge, by the way. The tools are easy. Me and you could put tools in today, whatever, they'll be in, by the end of tomorrow, running over the weekend, great. Culturally, they need to be accepted. They need to be consumable. And back to my point, easy, again, to consume, in flow. And by that, I mean, if you're let's take away developer for a second and go with Scrum Master, Agile Coach, PM, whoever's driving, the product delivery. If they live in a ticketing system, whatever that might be, Jira, ServiceNow, others are out there, you want to make it part of that system, that flow that they're in, so they get appropriate knowledge, time, and let's be honest, money put against it to be able to do it as part of an intrinsic part of the delivery. It's not, oh, I've delivered my product, now I need to secure it. It's like, I've delivered a secure product. And that's subtly different, but really important, the mindset shift to do that. And that could mean training. It could mean less story points if you're on a points-based system allocated. So you've got some headroom to learn, first of all, and then implement and start to chip away at the inherent risk, if there is any. If it's brownfield, there will be some inherent risk. So you need to pay off some debt potentially first, and then put controls to stop entropy coming in so that debt doesn't regrow, so to speak. Sorry, very long answer, but
no.
I think
it's important, as you say, because I think the one thing, as you mentioned, kind of, it's security problem. It's its own security problem, is because I think security, if you look at sort of through the way we work normally, we're very used to working in a sort of waterfall type of sort of projects. You build sort of frameworks, you test it, Now, if you all of a sudden go into AppSec, DevSecOps, it's very agile. So you can't do security the way you used to do it. And that's how, I think, as you mentioned, building that culture. And I think the key point is, as you mentioned, incentivization. So if you can get a metrics built in of, I always talk about quality code means that has to be secure code.
Yeah.
So if you want to measure their quality output by, measuring security as well, that's how I think we can potentially achieve great outcomes. Now, we've kind of been mentioning the swear word AI that it is, and it's
I'm trying not to kind of, but it is there, so we should acknowledge it.
But where do you see what role do you see AI playing in security field over the next year or two? Obviously, we can't, I guess, predict too far ahead because the things change too rapidly. But where do you see it making the biggest impact in the near future?
So you asked me to think about what the next things that I think are coming is, and there are a couple of things that kind of sprung to mind in recent reading and recent times, and what's happening with my 404 kind of thing is, there's one that I think is should be medium level difficult. And then there's one that I think is going to be really hard to achieve. So which one, Marius, would you like me to go first with?
Well, I think we should build it up. Start with the medium and then go into a hard.
Medium. Okay. So AI has got a risk surface inherent to itself.
Yep.
So serialized models and things like that are deserialized. Deserialization attacks have been around since ever and a day. So if you can inject executable code into a deserialization of a model, guess what? It's just like any other application, and you're running some arbitrary code in there. Which brings me back to supply chains of AI, training data, the model itself, all of the things that go into actually, building the model up before you even start using it. I'm not talking about prompt injection, that's over in operational. I'm talking about the build up, the training, the verification of the AI model itself. And if you're self-hosting, the infrastructure that's on as well, because that's another attack vector that we might not be used to kind of, managing, so to speak. So I think, first of all, we need to manage the AI creation, the LLMs, and how they're ingesting data. Do we trust the data? Was it manipulated? Does it have bias? Has it got there's a lot of research going into triggered attacks. I don't know if you've kind of heard that. It's if you put a certain number of parameters in the prompt, it will trigger a part of the model that you're very, very unlikely to find in pre-testing. Yeah. So for example, you might want to arbitrarily book a hotel room for free, but you might also want to say a health LLM, large language model, to misdiagnose a percentage of the population in a catastrophic example.
Yeah.
So all of these things need to be taken into account before the positives of AI are even considered. Yeah. So that's the negative connotation. So I think like an AI bill of materials or an ML bill of materials to do with the data, to do with the model, to do with all the parts, just like we do with software composition analysis, needs to come to light for, I'll call it AI, but LLM production, training, etc. I do think that should be something that we're taking, mainstream fairly quickly as this adoption takes place at such a rapid pace.
Yeah, definitely.
I do think research has started, by the way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think people sometimes even don't even understand some of it. They obviously run towards AI, but as you say, they, garbage in, garbage out. That's one thing. But as you say, actually, it's not only the data that you ingesting, but people, those who understand the way models work. Like when you build in a model and fine tuning, you build a feature vector. Now, if you inject something in a feature vectorization as well, you skew the output. There are so many steps that are going.
If anybody wants to go and Google something that proves this, by the way, it's not mine. I'm not associated with it. It's on GitHub. Is Poison GPT. Sorry, Poison GPT. It's a disclosed example of this poisoning of the LLM to give spurious results in a certain set of circumstance. So if you want to know what me and Marius are going on about, that's over on GitHub for sure. You can go and check it out.
Yeah, and even that, like for example, I think another thing people need to understand. I think somebody even posted it today or yesterday saying that, if you put the same request, you might get a different response.
Oh yeah,
and that's
especially if the temperature's turned up on the LLM, you get some weird and wonderful stuff out there if the temperature's too high. Again, if you want to look at temperature, look at it. It's on Google about what that means. But
so what's the hard bit?
The really hard one. Let's hit it. Last few minutes or whatever is, if you think about, and this is purely me thinking hypothetical universe, how cool would this be? So dynamic testing's always been difficult and or noisy, requires a high degree of skilled people, time, and we normally used to do it every so often. I'm going to say that much, right? The cyclic pen test is an example of that. Imagine a scenario, rather than using just brute force automation, spiders and things to crawl everywhere, that we can use an LLM to give a contextual angle onto the dynamic test that we're creating. Now, I'm going to use a travel scenario just because I like holidays.
Yeah,
So think about a travel booking website, and everybody wants to get the best holiday for the least amount of money.
yeah,
Pretty much standard, right? That's what you go on a travel website to do. And people have built websites on websites, of course. Is that if you could then, rather than just crawling all over looking for APIs and stuff with spiders, actually say, I want to attack this this website or this group of websites as a person that is a middle paid person from a particular country with this background, and I want to attack it from their mindset that focuses. So it's a contextual dynamic security test. Yeah. So you can say, if my primary customer base is, I don't know, China or India or Brazil or whatever, they've probably got different, I don't know, viewpoints of how they may look at holiday bookings, what they look for, and things like that. And I think it'd be a super interesting combination of traditional DAST with AI context on top. It's taking like they give me an answer in the style of Ozzy Osbourne, but attack it as a style of a typical or atypical user. I think that's going to be really cool, but I think it's going to be tough.
yeah. Because as you say, I think it's an interesting point because I think in a similar point of view, pen testing normally, or the pen testing outcomes, is as good as the pen tester is. And normally, therefore, the output can vary between the, experience of various testers.
Yeah.
So how do we enhance and support that, sort of testing scenarios with, different types of, I guess, experience, putting experience from all kinds of people and putting an LLM and just letting it go.
I honestly think it's going to be cool. I would love to build it. I'd
Yeah.
love to get a massive community of us all and make, a signed and verified AI capability LLM to
Yep.
be the ultimate automated pen tester.
Well, we just need to get one of the venture capitalists on a call. They like to throw money left, right, and center. We can build something for them.
Anybody that builds this, me and Marius want a cut.
Yeah, exactly. We want a percentage. Now, just outside of AI, I guess to
Yeah.
end, we've been talking about, the processes and all of that, but now, circle back, to us being a real geeks. What technology, in the near future or currently now, you think is something that really excites you? And I think they are doing some great stuff. What kind of you uncovered recently that you think is really exciting happening in the cybersecurity industry?
I don't think it's recently. I actually think that we're seeing, at long last, the widespread adoption of cloud native technology. And I do mean, serverless and Kubernetes. And it's been talked about for years, Marius. Yeah. How
Yeah.
many years have we been going, oh, yeah, we'll do Kubernetes soon? And yeah, but no, I've been working with organizations that are, when they say they're entirely serverless, I'm like, really? Are you sure? Because your data must be somewhere, and I'm pretty sure that that needs it. Anyway, they're 95% plus serverless.
Yeah.
And that's really cool because it means that we're moving away from those old architectures. We can build in that resiliency. We can put those control guardrails around, those kind of off the peg, right? I want to reuse this function. I want to have communication between teams to decouple them, because you can decouple a team and they're not waiting for four other teams. They can be more self-sufficient, less frustrated. They've got more time to do security in flow, and they can deliver more. That's a win-win-win.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at long last, it is happening. We've got, huge organizations now, even more traditional organizations are using Kubernetes in anger, in production, to support real critical workload. And it's taken 10 years, 9 years, 8 years, something like that, for it actually to make it to prod. It's been in dev for years. I get it. But now we're finally leveraging newer technologies, which gives us, sadly, it gives us a bit more complexity. This is not easy to control, but it gives us a lot more resiliency by design in its architecture.
Yeah, I think Kubernetes is definitely the way forward. I think it's just people obviously need to understand and need to level up on Kubernetes security knowledge, because I think from the outset people do not understand that, for example, any container can talk to any container by default.
Yeah.
So, configuring whether it's network security policies, whether it's, meshes or some type of security controls, and obviously how we
We can help them put those, those guidelines in place. And once they're in place, if you try and use something that's outside of those, or tries to use a role that's, cluster bound or whatever, we can put some controls in place to stop people hurting themselves that don't know. And
Yeah.
if they would say, hey, I need to do that, well, just talk to me, right? We're still people. And it
Yeah,
comes
yeah.
back to the people, right? The tools are easy, but some people we just need to have a chat.
Definitely, and I think, it's time flies when you're having fun, and I think on that note we can end. But it was amazing to have you on, Ryan. It's always great. I think with every podcast we're trying to deliver value, I guess, to our audience, but at the same time I'm learning always something new, and it's always great to have experienced people like yourself.
Yeah. Love learning, always. Great.
Brilliant.
Thanks for having me, Marius. Thanks.
Thank you.